All right, guys. So a couple of weeks have passed now since Toronto inevitably lost in Game 7 of the playoffs, as is just the usual. So given that situation, we jump in and have a chat about what is next for the Maple Leafs and what better subject to start on than the Marner and Tavares situation. Jaden, what are your thoughts on these? Because it's massive and they have massive implications on, if they lose both, if they lose one, even if they sign both, it could have huge implications going forward.
Yeah, so I'm just going to hover over. Look, I don't think Mana comes back just because I think that relationship sailed. I know Tree Living in his press conference said they were going to have negotiations with him, but I do think that ship has sailed. I think it's in Mana's best interest as well to go somewhere else. Um, Depending where he goes, he could get more money, and if he sacrifices some money, he can have really good chances at actual cup, which a lot of ex-Leafs have done in the past. Tavares, I think he resigns. Look, cap wages, I'm just hovering over it. They suggest 3/8 basically. I know people like Steve Dangle and stuff have suggested like 5 mil. I think that's ridiculous. He still produces. He's not a bad player.
That's a hometown discount. I think that's what they're referring to there. I think they're just hopeful that,
Yeah, but
that's,
then you do have the
yeah.
taxes, the higher cost of living in such a state and a city. I know he's made a lot of money. Like you don't really need as much, but
Yeah.
I think 7 for him is quite reasonable. I was predicting 7.5. I do think he resigns. I think a 3-year deal is probably what you want to sign as well, and I don't think he regresses. Personally, he's never had speed. His game style has always been the same, even in his older age at 34, and I don't see it regressing too much. It will, but not as much as I think people will expect to see from other star players. So I do think they keep Tavares. I think Marner goes. They save. I don't know how much is that. You got a new 7 mil, 7.5 mil Tavares. You lose Marner's 11 mil, so you're saving about what 15 mil there. Um, and then you got to basically put 8 mil into Knies.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, that's where it's going to be difficult, isn't it? I mean, if they did consider signing Mana, then obviously that makes the Nias conversation a little complicated because you don't really want to probably sign him to a bridge deal. I think personally that would be a massive mistake because you've seen it with Matthews and Mana. Like they all signed sort of bridge deals, which they weren't even RFA bridge deals; they were UFA like 5-year deals. Um, Terrible. But you've seen how it's backfired. And now Matthews is on 13.5. Mana, last contract 13, 14 mil or whatever. Now, so they need to lock up. They need to lock him up in term. So that's why I kind of Mana. Um, as much as I like Marner as a player, I think he's been a fantastic player. He gets way too much hate across the league and in the from the Leafs fans. Um, I think it's time for both of them to move on. I think that relationship's got a bit toxic. And yeah, I think for him it'd be just for probably his mental state to get into another team, new fan base, and just sort of like he hasn't been terrible in the playoffs, but I understand when it when the times get tough in the playoffs, those star players do go missing, and he is one of those players. So he sort of gets a redemption at doing that if he goes to another team, and who knows, he might go to Florida, a tax haven state, and only sign for 10 million.
yeah, it could be a bit
um,
crazy if he does go
yeah,
down that route, like do a Brad Marchand or something, and come back and haunt the Leafs.
yeah. Oh,
That
mate, if he went to Florida, like that would just be nail in the coffin for the Leafs fans. I think that would just be painful.
yeah. Moving on to probably the rest of their forward group, um, lack thereof in a sense. They've got, I'll just scroll up. Look, 26.5 mil to deal with. You've got 15, 16 mil, basically 16 mil getting tied up in Tavares and Knies if you resign them. Obviously, you're resigning Knies. It just depends how much. So you got 10 mil. You got what? 7 players to resign, something like that. And look, there's not much quality in the depth forward. You're going from 13 mil, 11 mils, 8 mil players, and then all of a sudden it drops off to basically under 4 mil and lower. You're not getting any depth scoring, especially in the playoffs. Kempf really didn't show up too much. Like you like the energy sometimes, but when you got to put it back in the net, they don't put it in the back of the net. Young Croak, Lawton's
Yeah,
decent, but yeah.
Lawton will be a big one, but I the big issue, like Nye's come along and he's on this cheap ELC contract, and they finally have a fifth top six forward, which they've always struggled because they had the core four. And the issue is that Matthew Nyes is ELC is now done. He's going to get paid, but they lose Marner, and all of a sudden they're back to having a core four again. Although it will be a little bit cheaper than it has in previous times, so maybe that will allow to do something. But like they need to do something because you look at that forward setup right now. I know they've got Easton Cowan coming up, and if he proves himself in camp, he will 100% be playing on that top six. To start the season. He's good. He's a good player. He's a good kid. They've got big raps on him and pretty hopeful. But even if he does come up, that's still five. You're still missing one top six forward that they've got to go out and try and get. And as you said, if you go say you go Knies for 9 mil, or 8 and 8 or whatever, or even 8 and 7, that's 15. You've got 11 mil left, and you need to sign 7 more players or whatever it is, or 6 more players. And it's like, okay, 11 million across 7 players. Like that doesn't give you a lot of room to do much. That doesn't give you a lot of room to go after a Sam Bennett, as has been rumored, or do the unthinkable, get Brad Marchand, to really round yourself out. But it also doesn't give you a lot to work on that bottom six, which has been such an issue for them in the past. Like you look at who they've got, as you just said, Camp, Young Croak, Domi, Lawton. They've got somewhat of a make-up there, Bobby McMahon as well. So if you can get if you can get like Philadelphia Flyers Lawton, that'd be a huge help. Max Domi is always going to be, relatively solid. If you can get a healthy young Crow camp, it starts to be somewhat of a bottom six, but I still feel like they're missing something. They still need that one or two more players, that little bit of depth, because you get a couple of injuries done, got nothing. And they just don't have the cap to do any of that. So yeah, I'm really interested to see what they're going to do. And on top of that, man, they need a puck moving defender.
Yeah.
And they're not cheap.
Well, that's what a lot of teams have. They kind of come staple these days. All the young kids are basically puck moving defensemen at this point. I'm thinking McCarr, the Foxes, Luke Hughes, Quinn Hughes, etc. So it's becoming more of a staple, but not with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Morgan Riley was meant to be sort of it, but he's never really been a full puck moving offensive defenseman in its all outright glory. And they've tried to make him that at some points, but he's just not that. Look, there's a lot of things like where you got signed is the defense. A lot of these guys have no move clauses, no trade clauses with some certain amount of teams and stuff. And look, they got long term, so there's not much movement to happen in the defense park. But for Morgan Riley, if you could get him to waive the no move clause, I would trade him. I would trade him I think you and me, we've discussed offline, and then we started seeing people doing, mock drafts, and that coming up was the Eric Carlson from Pittsburgh doing some sort of, trade between those two, a little bit of cap retention here and there from either team to make it kind of work. And I think that makes sense for both teams, because I don't think Pittsburgh really need that puck moving defenseman like they do
Carlson
have.
hasn't fitted
Nah,
in Pittsburgh properly. Letang's still going relatively strong. I mean, if Letang falls over, yeah, like they'd probably need Carlson, but I just don't think Carlson's really fit into their system.
I think they
Um,
need to change it up and free. I don't think you're going to free up cap space on Pittsburgh's side to make this deal, but a reshape in the decor could go a really long way. And Morgan Riley, with his pros and faults, he's very, very stable defenseman. Probably not worth the seven and a
he is.
half. Probably worth around
No,
5 or something, but stable defenseman that you can rely on. And I
yeah.
think
He
that
was
would
the
work
only
well for both.
defenseman they had at the time, right? Like he
Mm.
was he was the key defender that they had. They didn't have anyone else. He wanted to stick around. You give that guy money because that's what you have at the time. And um, unfortunately, as good of a server he's been, he's not really helped him out. I know he's elevated the game in the playoffs, unlike a few others, but he's just. I feel like if you could get they could just get a young, gun in the draft, come through, puck moving defender, take a bit of pressure, Riley. It'd be the perfect world, but they don't have any draft picks to really do that. They
Yeah.
don't have anyone in their system coming up that's really gonna do
No,
that.
you
So
mentioned the only person that's really going to come through um,
yeah,
in Cohen, and that's a Ford. And he's
exactly.
basically a budget Marner, kind
Mm,
of the same style esque. And so you're basically replacing Marner with a budget Marner. Um, but yeah, they really need. I don't know. Like you have a look. They're missing all their first rounds, missing 2 second rounds. Sure, they have Florida's this year, but it's going to be 31, 32. Um,
yeah.
so it's basically a second, like a third round.
Oh, that's the second round anyway, isn't it?
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
second round pick, but it's gonna be like a
it'd be late.
well
Yeah, yep,
64 whatever.
yep.
So it'll be late. It's basically an early third. Even Avs is gonna be their third is gonna be late. So they're gonna get no depth. They've got no assets in regards to value. If you were to value this team to others,
Mm,
and how do you add to that? I've thought about it in multiple ways, and I think you can only go to free agency
yeah.
to add it. But to add those people, then they're going to get more salary than you would normally want to pay someone. And if you're going for Bennett's, Marchands, and stuff that are 7, 8+ mils, there's no cap space for anybody down the bottom.
No, they don't have
On either
those.
side, the only
No.
saving grace is their goalies. They got Wall and Stallars. So it's a cheap tandem, basically 6 million. I'd personally move Stallars. Um, his value would be at absolute peak right now, and I feel like that's what they would need to do. And then you hope to get I don't know, someone like a Jake Allen to revitalize and be that 1B, 2A goaltender to come in.
Mm.
Um,
But
yeah,
Stolars is cheap. So the only reason you would trade Stolars, and this is the big thing, is just purely for his like capital at the moment. Like he is a valuable asset because he was one of the best goals this season. His contract is so cheap.
yeah,
Yeah, like you're gonna get good assets if you trade him up. Like he's not a player. He's on a great contract, which Toronto needs. He's a great goaltender, which they've needed for a long time, and paired with that's been fantastic for them because they haven't had that in the past. But you kind of do need to have a conversation. His value's not gonna his value's not gonna get any better than it is now. We're gonna have to either lose him to free agency or sign him to a much more expensive contract. Do you weigh that up? Joseph Wall's a pretty solid goaltender, and I know you've got yourself up again, but if Stolarz could bring you in some decent assets, or even bring you in a reasonable defender lines, do you consider something like that? I know it's crazy. I know it's like it's a bit left wing here,
Well,
but
he's got 1 year. He's a UFA. Does he stay after that? Do you lose another player for free that you could have gotten some assets for? Because look, they need to add assets. Because to be able to make trades, you need to be able to have something to trade. And right now they've basically got nothing. Like no draft picks. They got no forwards that a team would really go out for, unless you're trading a Matthews or Nylander. That's what I would do personally, is trade Matthews. Nobody ever talks about it, but I think Marner's production in the playoffs drops because Matthews doesn't show up. Marner's not the go-to scorer. He's always been the setup type player, and when you're setting up a player that's injured in quotation marks, I say in quotation marks because he played nationals, 4 nations, and he can't score, then it's going to bring your productivity down as well.
yeah, I mean,
So
yeah,
look, all I'm saying is like I think you have to really think about, you got a 3-year window basically because of Matthews' contract. So you got 3 years of going for it. That's how Wall's signed. So you stick with Wall. It's how a majority of your defense is signed. So that's your core, and Domi as well. So I think you got to look at it like, do we need 2 goalies that are really good, or can we go the risky route and get one really, like, go with Wall, find a cheap 1 mil or less backup? Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I would do. Other topic, I guess the big one, all the way at the top, Shanahan gone. I don't think they've announced who's replacing, have they?
Who's replacing him?
Yeah, I, I
I
don't think
heard
that's been
something.
announced. Maybe I missed it. But either way, like, I don't know how big of an impact that's going to have, because like I know he
Massive.
probably prevented some trades happening, especially with Marner and whatnot. But I don't think it's going to make a huge impact as I think people think, just because of how lack of assets they are at the moment and the situation they're in. It's it's a high need of retool,
Mm.
if not rebuild. That's
Yeah,
that's kind of the scary moment.
yeah, that's sort of where I was heading to next. Obviously with Shanahan gone, they don't have a replacement lined up just yet, but and just obviously everything we've just gone through, it kind of does feel like Toronto may. I'm not saying they'll be out of the playoffs season, but they might be close. Like they might be a real wild card contender. Like when you think about the teams that are coming up, like Florida, could they drop off? Who knows? They've had, but Tampa looks strong this year. Ottawa is only going to get better. So like,
Montreal's
is
getting
it,
better. He made playoffs. Like,
Montreal is getting better. Will Detroit finally make that
Detroit's probably
step?
going to get it, going to get it together.
You
Like,
know, is
they have,
Boston going to bounce back? Like, this Leafs team, like, they were good this season, and I was really surprised when they sort of lost. I think it's the way they lost to Florida that really shocked me. I thought if they lost in 7 to Florida and it was tight and it was close, everyone would have been like, "Oh, it's very Leafy like." But they got smacked in Game 5 and Game 7.
yeah.
That's what was very Leaf like. It was just that was
Yeah,
disgusting.
there was no heart, and that's where I
No,
criticize Matthews. I've said since his day one, he has no heart in how he plays personally.
yeah,
Um, and that's reflected in the contracts he's signed. It wasn't long-term deals to be with a team. It was, how do I maximize my
it's
value
how
for
much money.
myself? Um,
Yeah,
that was the contract styles he went for.
mm,
And look, it's going to work out for him probably in the end in regards to the amount of money, but probably not in regards to cups. And
yeah. Which is
I,
what you
I
play for, right?
like,
Like I get the
yeah.
money's nice, but
And they threw the
like
C on him when they shouldn't have. Tavares should have still been the C. Look, I can understand after this off season switching it around and stuff. but I think that was haphazard.
Should
And
have played out
yeah,
Tavares's contract, right? And then just said, hey, look, we'll move on, not necessarily from Tavares, and maybe bring you back, but this is the time where we can now be like, all right, we're going to hand that captaincy off to Matthews. Yeah, look, it's tough, man, because we can talk retool, and that's great, but the question is can they do it? Because like I feel like on the defensive side of things, they've got the defenders there. They that this year, the goaltending solid. The problem again, as we touched on, puck moving defender. They lose one of their core four just as it was turning into a
they lose a
five.
100-point player for free.
A
Like
hundred
a
point player
hundred
for
point player
free.
for free. Like that.
A hundred
That's
a 100 point
horrible.
player for free, and they could lose a point per game player for if Tavares doesn't resign.
Yeah,
So, and then if Tavares signed, yes, they gain agency, but you've now only got a core three. You've literally got Matthews, Knott, and Nylander, and that's it. That's your, and
and
then you've got to
who
build
are you
from there.
replacing Tavares with? Like what you're going to get
It's,
Bennett? Like people say they're
you
going to get
get
these
Bennett, but he's going to cost
players,
more.
but is Toronto right now with the way it looks, Marner leaving? Is this somewhere that you go, I would sign here for the cup? I would say no. And then it was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'll sign here for money. Then you got like the tax and the cost of living up there. So then you want more, and Toronto won't want to pay more. And look, I think the tax does get talked about a bit too much, and everyone's like, oh, Florida and Tampa are good because of the tax, and somewhat right, but Florida was crap for decades. Which
Yeah,
I think everybody forgets about because they've been good recently.
yeah.
And so
It's
that's
also the culture that you bring to your
yes,
team as well. I think
and
that's
that's what I
that's
was
what
looking about the
wins
hard
you
point is
cups.
I don't think the coach is good enough at Toronto. And look,
Something's missing.
they're breaking up the core four for it. I just think the wrong pieces are going. I would have moved Matthews before Marner. I know
Yeah,
there's not much you can do in that regard now. Um, and
yeah. They really missed the boat on this, didn't they? They had the chance to trade
they had 5 weeks when
Marcos.
Tree Living came in. I think he got told no by Shanahan.
Yep,
Uh,
yep. And they had the chance. They missed it, and now they're potentially going to lose him. And yeah, like this sort of thing here could set this franchise back for years because I know the cap's going up. So maybe they season to the wind and go whatever happens happens. We make the playoffs. We make the playoffs. We don't. Whatever. Then we go to free agency with the $8 million. The cap's increasing next season or whatever it is. And try and work something from there. But yeah, like you look at it and you go, okay, well, if you do that, you've then only got 2 years of Matthews.
mm,
And is Matthews going to stay in Toronto? And if he does stay in Toronto, how much more is he going to want than what his current contract's on?
yeah.
Is he going to be wanting 16 mil, 17 mil? Like,
He'll probably perform in 2027, 28 when his contract's up. Blow it out the park. Ask for maximum. I foresee that happening, and then he'll ask for 8 years, and then he'll be 38 when that contract. It won't be a good contract. It'll be a right contract maybe for 4 years.
yeah.
So I feel like Matthews has hurt the team in that way. Look, the end of this Maple Leafs core and whatnot was the signing of Tavares, not because Tavares, but because a big contract going on the forward group again
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
that.
it
And,
changed the dynamic going forward.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it doesn't work. Look, you can pay 4 people a lot of money. One of them have to be a defender or
Mm-hmm.
a, a goalie that's really good. You know, a Vasilevsky, Bobrovsky, 10 million goalie.
Mm.
That have won cups, and they don't have that. They don't have that on the D. They don't have that in
Yeah, but you also
goals.
need playoff players as well. Like, you look at what Edmonton right now. McDavid on 12.5, and yes, Draisaitl, all right, he was on a cheap $7 million contract or whatever, but he's going to be on next year. McDavid's probably going to take bloody 16, 17. Who knows what McDavid's going to take? But they're playoff performers, man. They're absolute ballers. They get into the playoffs. They just step up to another level. They go harder, they hit harder. Like their point production increases, and their point production's already crazy.
And
It,
that comes from the leaders, right? Like you look
yeah,
at the leadership aspect of Draisaitl, McDavid, even Nugent, who gets overshadowed, and the even the other ones. Like it's the culture that they've built there that's a bit
all of
different.
them, like all of them, every single player in that team seems to step up come playoffs
Even
because it
Kapanen, who
starts
was
from
a
the top.
double waiver guy, and now he steps up in the
Y-
playoffs.
you go through their list. They pick up Arvidsson off for nothing, basically like injured a chance. Corey Perry injured bloke, give him a chance. Bloody they did it with Evander Kane, Kapanen, like
Yeah, well,
every single one
you're
of the
touching on
guys.
my next point really well. Is they have to Toronto's future. They have to do what Washington did, and you have to go out for the risky picks. That players that look like they were going to break out and didn't, or players that have had a down year that are going to be on the cheap that you can bring in on cheaper contracts and hope they outperform it. It's what Washington did to rebuild. It's what Oilers did that you mentioned on retooling their bottom end.
Mhm.
That's what Toronto have to do here.
So
Um,
what you're saying is they need to trade Stolas for Pierre-Luc Dubois.
all right, do it. Let's make the trade happen.
That's done.
Now look, one of the interesting gets we talked about like a puck moving defenseman, and then you talk about someone who's been down in their career, like hasn't produced the way everybody thought they would. They've been moved around. Bowen Byram, um,
Mm.
with the Buffalo Sabres, I think is at the moment.
Yep.
Was at the Avs. I think that's kind of the perfect player you want to go for. Is a bit cheap on the cheaper end, but can overproduce on that contract if you sign long term,
Yeah,
or
you could
medium to
sign
long
him.
term, and then you can get value from that player.
Mhm.
I think his RFA.
Yeah, he's an RFA. He's only 23 years old, I think.
Yeah,
So yeah, you could probably sign him to a 3-year deal, and he would still be an RFA at the end of it. Or you sign him to a 2-year deal or whatever. Keep it cheap. What he's on now, 4 mil, 3.9 or what?
yeah,
Um, maybe that. Well, I don't know if they've got the picks to offer sheet him, but like that you're right. You're 100% on there. That is a player that would be perfect for them. They can fit him into their cap. They would obviously have to move their defenders
mm.
at the moment, but I
But yeah,
mean,
you look at his
surely you could do
predicted
that.
cap, 5 by 7 mil. Like that's replacing Morgan Riley. Um,
Yeah,
and look, you can maybe do, negotiate less. Who knows for more years, or whatever. But I that's the type of player I would aim for. These RFA UFAs that maybe haven't peaked, that could peak, or had a downward year or injury prone year, and maybe you sign them to a 1 year cheap deal. Those are the players that you need to do it, because I think majority of teams that win the cup or go really long always have these, I guess what you say, thrown around players that go through teams or struggled, and then all of a sudden, overproducing that 1 year because it just
yep,
clicks, and that's what helps you get over the line. I'm looking
yeah,
at like look at players you listed: Edmonton, Florida had some last year. Tampa had Patrick Maroon for a few years, who bounced around the league.
yeah. I mean, look at Florida's team now. Like they literally went out and picked up Mikola, which I rated him so highly when the Rangers traded for him a few years back for their playoff run. I thought that was going to be one of the big reasons they'd go deep. Didn't end up happening, but because he's just a solid player, and now he's killing it for Florida. You've got Gustav Forsling. They picked up off waivers. Now he's one of their best defenders. Like, that's just they're the sort of players that you're um and that's sort of how you know why Florida are so good. I get they've got the tax haven, but they're good because they know how to pick up. Edmonton don't have the tax haven. And look what they've done. They've just gone, do you know what? We're gonna go pick up some of these players have
Yeah,
that we can just take a risk on. Put them with, Kapanen's playing top six with Draisaitl. Like
Well,
He was
yeah,
out there like it's insane. Like he's a player that barely played this year. They picked up Jeff Skinner after he got bought out from Buffalo. He barely played. I think he played his first playoff game against Dallas in the third round. But like they just they go after those sort of players for their bottom six because they know that the talent they can play. They want to redeem themselves because their careers sort of like dropped off a cliff, and they get the performances out of it.
mm,
That's what Toronto sort of need. They need to be start like they need to bring that culture into the team. But that's where I guess your thing on Matthews is meant to be the leader. Are we seeing that from him? And it
no.
just doesn't seem to be the
I didn't
case.
like his press conferences either. It almost sounded like he was throwing some of the like team under the bus. And
Yeah,
look, we don't know what's going in the locker room. Um, like to be frank, like you never know, what the culture's like acting like there. But I what I've seen is that Matthews, Marner, a lot of the time don't accept like, yeah, you know what, it's on me. That's why I
mm,
think who Tanev should have been the captain when after was it game 5, I think it was, or something. It's
yeah.
like, you know what, it's on me. Like I'm a negative plus minus, it's on me. Like that's how you
But
get better.
That's who you want in the locker room. That's
Yeah,
why Tanner was such a great pickup for.
yeah. And he got
Um,
beaten around by Florida that whole thing because they realized he's a gun, and also he was a leader for him. And I didn't see anybody else, stand up for him or take the hits that he did. So he was MVP, 4.5 million, great deal. Probably won't work out, going into his age of 40 with that contract, but he's doing right for now. But I want to see more leadership. You can get some vets, some cheap vets, but vets want to go to playoff Stanley Cup teams. I don't know if you're a vet, you're looking at Toronto and going, that's where I want to go right now. Unless you're like
yeah,
a Toronto fan or something, or a Canadian.
yeah,
I don't think it's like your first pick on a destination.
yeah. So, yeah, I guess like I really want to see him turn it around, man. Like I feel for the Leafs fans. Like they've gone through a lot and they've gone had a lot of break, and it's been an absolute wild run. Whether they win a cup or not, I just love
It's
to
been
get to
like
an East.
60
Yeah,
years. Like some of those
it's been
fans
so
have never
long.
seen a cup.
No, no,
Majority of
exactly.
them.
Like they've gone their whole lives. Some of them are in their 50s.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So I would love to see them turn it around. I am just really struggling to see how they do it. Um, I'm worried for them. I just hope that whoever they're bringing in as president can send them in a new direction and the direction and turn it around for.
Yeah. Well, the president's meant to focus on the business side of things, not really the hockey. That's what the GM's
Yeah,
meant to be doing. But
it's also leadership as well.
yeah, yeah,
When you
it's
it drives from the top,
I
and
know.
if you
Shit
come
shit
in
falls downhill. Yeah.
exactly because he was the reason why the core stayed together for so long,
Yeah.
um, and then that drives down, that trickles down to everything else. Like oh, anything, and they will never up, and then everyone just goes, oh, well, you can't like nothing's going to change. It doesn't matter. Whereas you get a president in that is, um, and does the right thing by the franchise, treats his players with respect or her respect, but does the right thing by the franchises, and really drives from the top. That'll feed down. They've already got a solid coach in Ube who is an absolute hard ass, built for playoffs. Um, Tree Living, we'll see how he goes GM wise, but um, that'll just trickle down, and then that goes down to the locker room. And if you can pull Matthews' head in, um, and get him to really start being a true leader, then that'll obviously go through the locker room as well.
Yeah. I don't know if you can though. I think leadership's a trait you can improve on, but a lot of it is ingrained early on, I think, in life. Um, and I just think with his contract, he isn't that player.
Yeah,
um, but that's my personal opinion. Any Matthews fans were probably out there disagreeing with me and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I guess we can leave it there. A very interesting offseason going to happen for the Leafs. Basically, it's going to decide probably in the next 6 to 8 years, I would say, for the Leafs this offseason. It could very drastically depict if it's going to be a rebuild in 2, 3 years, and then 5 years of pain, or if they're going to be going in the cups. So we're gonna have to see what they add. They got players like Camp for Youngkirk. They probably want to trade off. You know, big big signings that happened with Tavares. We mentioned a big trade with Riley. So big things to change. Whether they come to fruition or not is going to be interesting. I think they did all right though. The team they lost to in 7 is now in the Stanley Cup final again. It's not a team that you probably get swept, and it probably still wouldn't have been as bad. Hello, Canes, almost got swept. Hey, it wasn't a sweeping, but there we go.
Not a sweep,
Just
sweep.
not a sweep, but it's kind of a sweep, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thanks for chilling out. Thanks for viewing, and we will be posting more videos. We'll be getting back into it, assuming our lives are more steady now, with all the kids and moving houses and all that stuff. So stay tuned. Like, subscribe, and comment below. Until next time, catch you guys.
See you guys.